Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. It's the 2025 Dynasty Dummies Rookie Hootenanny. We're here presented by Fantasy Cares. And this week, we're into wide receivers. We've left the running backs behind for now. But if you are interested in hearing about a running back that we did not talk about, please reach out to us because we do have a class participation portion of this program. We do have the catch-all shows, and we will do our best to catch most, if not all, of the players that you're interested in. So go back and look, go back and listen, see the 12 running backs that we have talked about. And if there is another player or two or five that you're interested in hearing about, let us know. I am at Tacit Assassin 13. JMic's at JMic Check. The Dynasty Dummies account is everywhere. You could even send it to Fantasy Cares. We'll get it. But we're on to wide receivers tonight, JMic. How you feeling about that?
Zach, I feel good to be with you this evening. I feel good that the weather was, we got a high of 63 here in Cincinnati today. I feel good about all of my family went to bed on time this evening. There's a lot of things I feel good about, Zach. This wide receiver group may not be one of them, but regardless, we're here. It's the Hootenanny. We're excited. And even though, Zach, I think maybe some of our expectations with this first group of six is tempered a good bit, maybe even with the wide receiver class as a whole, we'll see how that unfolds as we go. It will be good to at least get conversation going. And now that we have the 12 running backs that we've talked about, to now talk about the wide receivers that come into play in this class, we know that there's at least two tight ends that people are projecting to possibly go into the first round. We know of a couple of quarterbacks that are likely to go in the first round. Things are starting to take shape for us, Zach, when we think about the big picture of how we see these guys via the film. So I guess my question to you, even before we get into your musings or anything else, now that we will have this picture with the wide receivers, are you still feeling pretty positive about the class as a whole?
Yes, but, and there is a large but there.
Big booty Judy.
All right. I'm still seeing this class as asymmetrically good. I am not as confident in the quarterbacks as the NFL is. And oftentimes I think the NFL panic picks quarterbacks. I think it's a little bit like a dynasty startup or a dynasty rookie draft, where even though you may not love the quarterback, you got to have them because it's the cheapest you'll ever be able to acquire them. You need to have quarterbacks in your lineup because that's where the points come from, or the big. And with the NFL, your entire offense is centered around that focal point of quarterback. But I'm not necessarily super excited about this quarterback class. I think same with the wide receivers. But this class is a good class at the running back position. And I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised at the tight end position as far as I've been. I mean, I'm not ready to make a flag plant yet on tight end, but as far as we've been, I think this is still it's not one that I would like roll the banner down, good class, but it's asymmetrically good. There are good positions within this class.
Much to be discussed, much to be unpacked when we think about the film, what we see in these guys. And just to set the stage a little bit, the wide receivers that we'll be talking through this evening are Tet McMillan of Arizona fame. We'll talk through Travis Hunter. And I know that some people are like, wait, Travis Hunter, he's going to be a DB at the combine. Are you sure you really want to talk about him with the wide receivers? Well, the man said he wants to play both ways. we're going to see about him playing both ways. So, maybe he is, maybe he's not, but we are going to talk about what we saw on his film today. Then we'll get into the likes of one, Luther Burden III out of Missouri. From there, we'll talk through Emeka Egbuka of Ohio State fame. No, not that Ohio State wide receiver that felt like he was there for 15 years. That's Chris Olave. No, not other Ohio State wide receiver that felt like they were there for 50. That was Michael Thomas. No, this is Emeka Egbuka. After Emeka Egbuka, we'll get into Tre Harris for Ole Miss transfer, and we'll get into him as well. And then lastly, we'll talk through fast rising, many will say, Matthew Golden, only getting one season at Texas, but daggone it, did he make the most of the opportunity that he had for a team that won a whole lot of games this season. So before we get into the wide receivers, Zach, what has been on your mind?
Well, the combine's coming up. And before that happens, a quick reminder that combine numbers, while they are fun, they don't really tell us much about who is going to be successful at the receiver position, especially. And also remember that wide receiver is more like a taxonomic class rather than a position. There are subsets of positions within wide receiver underneath that heading, players succeeding in vastly different ways. A fast 40 time isn't necessarily a gold star on a player's profile that necessitates moving him up into the stratosphere. And a slow 40 time isn't a death knell. There are ways to win with speed. There are ways to win with quickness, strength, savvy from the receiver position. And often those look nothing alike. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. CeeDee Lamb doesn't succeed the way Tyreek Hill does. DJ Moore doesn't succeed the way Mike Evans does. Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't succeed the way Deebo Samuels does. But they are all receivers, and they all succeed. So that's kind of been on my mind, especially with the combine looming, especially talking the first 6 wide receivers tonight.
It jumped on us too, Zach, because I was even talking to my wife, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, and I mentioned the combine coming up this weekend, and she said, "How is it already time for the combine? You haven't talked about that or anything." I said, "Well, that's because I just found out that it's this coming weekend." So this process is going, and obviously I know that when we get on the mics, like, the time is coming. We are slowly but surely marching our way forward, and to be able to see these guys and understand that they're playing the position that says wide receiver, but looks vastly different from player to player. It's going to be a lot of fun to figure out where these guys can win, how we see that translating to the next level, and what we think about their prospects even before the draft comes. So let's just get into it. And actually, Zach, we're going to start with Travis Hunter so that people aren't thinking, why are you all talking about this guy? Look, we've already been through it. But just so everyone's aware, Travis Hunter, if you've been under a rock the last several months, a superstar cornerback / wide receiver for the Colorado Buffaloes, 6'1", 185, 21-year-old Heisman Trophy winner. As a matter of fact, Zach, it wasn't just a Heisman Trophy. The man took home the 2024 Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, the Chuck Bednarik Award, the Fred Biletnikoff Award, which, for those wondering at home what the Fred Biletnikoff Award is, that is for the nation's best collegiate wide receiver. Just let that breathe a moment. He also won the Ronnie Lott Trophy, the Walter Camp Player of the Year. He was a 2-time All-American, Zach, this past season, being a unanimous choice for All-American. Not only that, if we're thinking about his exploits at wide receiver, before people start thinking again, hey, what's going on? He led the Big 12 in receptions with 96. Oh, excuse me. He led the Big 12 in receiving touchdowns with 15. Oh, wait. He was number 2 in the Big 12 in receiving yards, 1,258, which was good for 5th best in all of college football. Travis Hunter was doing work, not just at corner, but also as a wide receiver. And again, just to put the full stat line together for you to hear it, 96 catches, 1,258 yards, 15 touchdowns as a wide receiver this season, which far dwarfed the work that he did last season, which people were kind of buzzing about what he could be possibly as a wide receiver, even in that 2023 campaign. Zach Reed, we're talking about one of, if not the most accomplished season in college football history. Let's talk Travis Hunter.
That was a beautiful intro, JMic, and I'm going to give you a little background. Fred Biletnikoff led the entire country in receiving yards and touchdowns in the 1964 season, and he was a consensus All-American. Chuck Bednarik was an All-American linebacker in 1948, is widely considered one of the most vicious tacklers in NFL history. They both reside on Travis Hunter's trophy shelf. Hunter's the only player in college history to win both the Biletnikoff Best Receiver and the Bednarik Award, and the Heisman was just icing on the cake. Although Hunter is a two-way player, his prowess at wide receiver is obvious. He uses 3 distinct moves to get off press coverage, beating defenders with a jab, a hesitation move, and an inside-out step. Hunter has an array of double moves that he uses to spin corners and create leverage downfield. Zone coverages pose little problem to him because he has a great spatial awareness, moving throwing lanes and sitting down to present a target for his quarterback. And this is especially apparent when Hunter throttles down from full speed in order to plant himself in an opening. So there are so many things that Travis Hunter does well on the offensive side of the ball. I'm going to be so crestfallen if we lose him to the defense, like it sounds like.
The defender in my heart makes me sad to say this. Being someone who played ball and played defense, collegiate level, I really want him at wide receiver. So bad. Listen, his short area quickness is really fun, even for a guy who's kind of longer and rangier. But I do like his ability to start stopping that sense. The way that he's able to navigate through traffic, like across field, specifically on deep overs, and I call it the Deshaun Jackson route because I think Deshaun Jackson kind of made that famous with the work that he would do with Philadelphia. I love the way that he's able to avoid traffic, not allow for people to get their hands on him when he's going across horizontally. And that allows him to be able to get open consistently on those deep overs where Shedeur would hit him quite often. They'd run that play or various plays for him to be able to run that route multiple times in the course of a game. Excellent ball tracker at all levels. And for my money, Zach, he might be I'll just say it. I think he's the best ball tracker in the class for me. Yeah. When it's in the air, he's got the coordination to do the thing that sometimes outfielders do because you don't see wide receivers do it. As they're running, to look down and see what's kind of happening around them, but continue to go back and retrack and retrace. And he finds the ball with ease. And again, it's not something that's common for wide receivers. Typically, wide receivers are keeping their eyes on the ball the entire time. But he's got this, I don't know if it's a sixth sense. I don't know what it is, but I really enjoy what he's able to do to adjust to the football in those instances. I do think that he's a confident hands catcher, even though he often will get his body involved. He's willing to extend outside of his catch radius to be able to get the ball even over the middle. I like his ability to run after the catch, even though I think sometimes he does way too much juking and jiving to try to be able to make things happen. But I do think that oftentimes he is a quick decision maker and he's able to beat angles with his IQ, with burst, and with speed. Oftentimes he's making the first defender miss, and I think that he's keenly aware of what's happening around him as a ball carrier and adjusts accordingly. I don't typically try to talk a lot in terms of going through all my notes for a specific player. I do think Travis Hunter warranted it.
Absolutely.
That said, could possibly be playing cornerback at the next level. And even for him being all world on both sides, certainly some refinement issues when we think about his game as a wide receiver. What do you got, Zach?
Yeah, so there's a lot of buzz that Travis Hunter will play primarily cornerback at the next level. And I think he is the exact kind of cornerback that would give himself trouble. Physical defenders can get him to give up on routes. And you mentioned him being able to pick through and avoid defenders. I think that's necessary because he does tend to ease back when he's being bullied, even though sometimes he has the skill set to win those one-on-one battles. He just doesn't want to get in that physicality. If the play is designed to go away from Hunter, his level of effort drops off noticeably. He has a really bad habit also of giving ground at the catch point on underneath throws instead of immediately attacking. I think this is what you were talking about when you said that he has a tendency to do too much with the ball when he's trying to add yards after catch. I think he gives up ground sometimes trying to create extra ground, and I don't love that. That step or two of retreat costs him yardage after the catch. Travis Hunter may well be the best receiver in the 2025 class, but it remains to be seen if he will make that jump to the NFL at the position. If he does wind up playing receiver, I think his versatility downfield and his ability to consistently beat whatever coverage is thrown at him will make him immensely valuable for fantasy.
And Zach, I think that you nailed the thing that is interesting, because I think it speaks to a piece of, with him playing both sides of the ball, not fully getting the repetitions or the development as a wide receiver. And I think that we see that oftentimes in play strengths, in play strength when he gets challenged at the line of scrimmage, and not necessarily having an entire assortment of moves to be able to shake loose consistently. Because when people get their hands on him early, he does have this speed and athleticism to be able to kind of make up the ground after he gets jolted at first. But again, for thinking about timing offenses or things of that nature, that's not going to be something that's going to be helpful. He's got a tendency to be able to turn and drift when running outs, and specifically, I think, through out routes where he'll get this kind of light back pedal almost when he's fading away from the quarterback, which, again, I don't know if it's a muscle memory thing as a cornerback or what the case is. And just as you mentioned, he frequently is giving up ground on what could be minimal positive plays or minimal loss plays, hoping to be able to break the big play. And it just creates more problems in those instances. He very much thinks that blocking is optional. Just kind of like, y'all got it. But again, from a talent standpoint, from an upside standpoint, I really, really hope that he would be playing wide receiver at the next level, which takes us to Joey Wright in the chat. Joey, thank you for joining us this evening. Greg and Wilson are in here with us as well. But Joey asked, what is your ideal landing spot for Hunter?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I have one yet.
Well, I'll give you a moment to think about it. And I'll just throw out a couple of thoughts. If you think about the places that are in the top 5 that you'd think, I think one of the most fun pieces would be if he ended up in New York with the Giants, because Neighbors on one side, Travis Hunter on the other side would be box office. I would be here for that. Maybe they bring in Sam Darnold as the quarterback, and all of a sudden that could look like a really fun situation. So for me, he get the opportunity to play corner, obviously, for the Giants, because I know that they need some help out there as well. But I think that would be absolute box office, even though I think that if he went to somewhere like Cleveland, they could probably use him more on the offensive side, because they have had competent corner play with the players that they have. When we think about the Denzel Wards, I can't, names escaping me in terms of who the rest of the guys they have in the back end, but I know that they've invested in that space. So I think the Giants. What about you, Zach?
I'm going to homer this because the Patriots got
Oh,
Drake May.
don't you do it.
So for the longest time, I saw McMillan mock to the Patriots. That's not something that I'm particularly interested in. But Hunter, if he were in New England and if he played wide receiver, gives them what they don't have, which is a number one, a true number one, somebody that can grow with May. I mean, it probably won't happen, and they need more things than just Travis Hunter. But man, that's I want the young quarterback with the young wide receiver and just let that team grow. I see Wilson in the chat. We don't often do in the chat on this show, but he said Hunter could be the next Shohei Ohtani, but in football, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was a two-way player baseball in college. I pitched, I played the outfield. It's so much different in baseball because in football you're playing both sides of the ball in the same game, like basically at the same time with no rest. Whereas if you're pitching, oftentimes you have a DH or you're only at bat every 3 innings. So it's a little bit different in terms of the wear and tear. And then you add in the fact that it's the NFL and the physicality of both sides of the ball, but especially corner where you're having to make hits. It just feels like an NFL team would be doing Travis Hunter a disservice and themselves a disservice to play him a lot on both sides of the ball.
No, I'm right there with you. Especially just the intricacies that go into each side of the ball at that level. There's no simply putting you on the right side of a formation as a wide receiver, which I feel like was often the case at Colorado. Offense's right side of the formation and just kind of being out there in that sense. There's just way too much intricacies that go into both sides of the ball. So I don't know in that respect at that level that's going to be something that carries for any length of time. And I think that so many people have already brought up these points of whatever team takes him has to be very confident in how they're willing to implement him, how many snaps he'll get on either side, where he's going to be primarily. I think there's so many things that have to go right, or you'll have fan bases really upset and coaching staffs that likely will be criticized for whatever decision that they make. Oh, he needs more snaps at wide receiver, needs more snaps at corner, whatever the case may be. But it's a long time on Travis Hunter, so I will make sure to keep the rest of my commentary brief. But I'm a fan. I'm such a fan of him as a wide receiver. All right, here we go. Moving on. Tet McMillan. Mr. McMillan has played football with his quarterback, Noah Fafita, as at least the research told me, for 8 straight years. I believe that they said he's received a touchdown from Noah Fafita for 8 straight seasons, which is nuts. Obviously, that includes 3 seasons at Arizona, where he was showing off and showing out his last 2 seasons. If we look back at 2023, and again, I didn't mention this previously, but Tet, likely tallest of the bunch that we'll be talking through over the next several days, 6'5", 212 pounds, 21-year-old. He turns 22 in April. 2023, he had 90 catches for 1,402 yards and 10 touchdowns. He follows that up in a season where Arizona loses their head coach. It's not as star-studded in terms of excitement or the offense looking competent, or even Noah Fafita's play, quite frankly, and still follows that up with 84 catches, 1,319 yards, and 8 touchdowns. When you think about what he was able to do, he was a consensus All-American this past season and number 1 in the Big 12 in receiving yards with 1,319 yards. Number 1 in receiving yards per reception a year ago in the Pac-12 in 2023 with 18 yards per catch. Teteroa McMillan is someone that lots of folks are very excited about. Consensus, I think, overall, the wide receiver one in the class for many scouts in the fantasy space. The list goes on and on. Zach Reed, Teteroa McMillan, go.
If you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take one book with you, what book would you choose? What if you were on the desert island, stranded there alone, because your evaluation of Tet McMillan was far enough against consensus that the draft community banished you to a lifetime of sun, sand, and reading the stand? McMillan is built like that throwback, prototypical wide receiver, the 6'5", the 212. He uses his size well. He wins often when he is in contested catch situations, using his height, using his leaping ability, and his strong hands to outstrip defenders. McMillan has 3 distinct moves that he uses to get off the line of scrimmage when pressed. He uses a hesitation, a jab step, and a hand swipe, a swipe chop move. Once the ball is in his hands, McMillan does have the ability to add extra yards. This talent after the catch, I think, separates him from some of the other vertical separators that we may talk about in this class and that we've talked about previously.
Yes, indeed. And he's one at being 6'5", he does leverage his long frame well. He's willing to extend outside of his frame, even when going over the middle. And I think that there's more area on him, obviously, to be hit from a quarterback, but he does show a willingness to expose himself to be able to make a play. As you mentioned, Zach, strong ball winner at the catch point when we think about in traffic and in one-on-one, which I feel like he is finding himself in traffic and in those opportunities to make plays against defenders that are close by. More on that to come. Spectacular catches are all over the place for him. And that's going up, that's going out, and his body control and ability to contort and reposition in the air, I think, is very strong. He does leverage strong dip and rip to avoid handsy defenders early in the route when he's offered a clean release, I should say. And I think that he's strong with the ball in hand. While he's not particularly dynamic, I think that he does show a clear vision for trying to get more yards when he can. And he's not easy to bring down when he wants to be. I think when he's motivated. That said, Zach, you just talked about spending an eternity on an island. So tell us more about what could let a lot of people down with Teteroa maybe not being your top wide receiver.
Yeah, passing concepts have evolved in the NFL, moving away from that post-up catch point winner in favor of quick separators and players who can shift from the outside to the inside and win with matchups. I don't think McMillan is a quick separator, but instead he's overly reliant on late separation, physically moving the defender off him, or vertical separation, out jumping his opponent. And whether the opposing defense is playing zone coverage or man, McMillan is content to let defenders maintain contact with him in route, letting his size win the battles for him. I don't think that's a recipe to win at the next level. He also tends to be far more successful over the middle of the field rather than the sidelines, where McMillan struggles to consistently make plays, which is interesting to see a big player like that. You know, I think back to T. Higgins, and one of the things that kind of was a saving grace for T. Higgins in my evaluation was his ability to make that back shoulder play on the sideline consistently, because that's an NFL throw. It's one that gets quarterbacks out of trouble when there's nobody open. I don't think McMillan does that consistently enough for me to be happy. Tet McMillan is a big, physical, talented wide receiver, and he has gaudy numbers trailing behind him from his career at Arizona. I think he's a virtual lock to be a first-round NFL pick. So he's going to have draft capital, and he should have ample opportunities to succeed at the next level. And he may, but he'll be on an island with just a handful of other receivers over the past 10 years who win the way he does?
Oh, Mr. McMillan. Zac, I think that you put that really well, and I only want to bring up a few things with that. As we mentioned previously, defenders are often in his hip pocket. And so much of what he is doing in terms of winning is at the catch point, and he does it often, to be clear. He is doing that frequently. Are you going to continue to be able to beast these guys at the next level? Time will tell. As you mentioned, he does a good job of flashing positive work and footwork and ability to contort against the sideline, but I did not see that consistently. I don't think that he was challenged often at the line of scrimmage, and when he is, I don't think that he's consistently winning because defenders are able to get hands on and ride him, essentially stifle his progress up the field. He's way too big to be losing like that so often, which maybe was more of a frustration for me. But that's something that really stuck in my craw, and it didn't sit great. One of the things I didn't mention before in the positive section that I think is an interesting observation, he's very willing to let blockers set up for him on screens, and they threw him a lot more screens, I think, than you'd see from typical players of his size. And here's the sticking point, Zac. It's the thing I want to get to. We had a player that I think played similarly to him a couple years ago in Drake London. And I know people will say, oh, you got the big light skin dude. You think they all play the same? No, I'm not playing that game. We're not doing that. What I'm saying is Drake London, a lot of these same notes that I have for Tet, I went back and looked what I had for Drake London, and a lot of them are similar. He gets the ball a lot on screens, and positive things happen in that sense. I don't think that his short area quickness is all that great, but I don't know that he necessarily has to have short area quickness great because he does really well at the catch point. So many of the things that I was just looking at, I was like, wow, this kind of checks. And so I wasn't high on Drake London before, and he has since become a very positive player and obviously closed the season really well last year. I think he's a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy last year, I believe, as he finished. So while my film grade isn't the highest on Tet McMillan, I do see the upside, and I do see the proof of concept for what could be, even if it's not my cup of tea. And even though he does things that frustrate me, he does enough to continue to develop into what could be the hub of a positive passing game at the next level.
Yeah, and that's it. Like we don't know, but if I'm making bets, there are a whole lot of players who were similar to London that didn't see. I mean, N'Keal Harry's notes were very similar to the Drake London notes, which are very similar to the Tet McMillan notes. And it doesn't mean McMillan is bad and won't succeed. I think he's a good player. I think that the archetype that he is, it's a lot harder road to A, succeed in the NFL, but B, succeed for fantasy, which is really what we care about.
Yeah, straight up. Well said, Zac. Let's move on to the next player on the list tonight, Luther Burden III, out of Missouri, Mizzou, for those that know. 5'11", 208, 21-year-old, doesn't turn 22 until December. We're looking at a guy who in 2023 was filling all of the prophecies about who he was as a recruit and who he was as the favorite son out of Missouri. In 2023, he was number 2 in the SEC in receptions, number 3 in the SEC in receiving yards, which was good for 9th in the country, and number 3 in receiving touchdowns with a stat line of 86, 12, 12, and 9 touchdowns. 2024, everything was a step back. He was number 3 in the SEC with 61 catches, which is weird how maybe people weren't making a lot of catches and whatnot in the SEC this past season. But he goes in a long list of folks that we outlined in the last running back episode, Zac, when we think through players who second to last season in college, Chuba Hubbard, that guy, Braylon Aller, Oh, my goodness. Ollie Gordon. Wow. Uh, let's add Luther Burden to the list because 61 catches for 676 yards and 6 touchdowns is not getting it done. Missouri took a step back as a team. Burden didn't get the same opportunities that he got a season ago. Zach, what do we do with the curious case of Luther Burden III?
To paraphrase W.P. Kinsella, time rolls on like an army of steamrollers. It erases, it rebuilds, then erases again. I want to love Luther Burden. 4 years ago, he would have been a draft darling for me, a player that I tied myself to early on and continued to defend throughout the prospect process, maybe even to this day. I mean, just maybe. But time rolls on. There's still a little less than a week to go before the NFL Combine, but it's already obvious that speed is one of Burden's most important weapons. I think both in route and once he has the ball. He's very smooth at the catch point and transitions from receiver to runner very quickly. And when he has space to operate immediately after the catch, Burden can be very creative and add some chunk yardage. Although he played primarily from the slot or in motion, Burden has multiple ways to beat press. He wasn't pressed often, but he does use a jab crossover step and simply straight speed sometimes where he can just get off the line quick. So some things that I like about him, again, things that younger me would have been really excited about.
Dear younger me. And it's funny that you say that, just as a quick observation for folks. And I went and did a little bit of research. 2 things. One, we already have a motion man for this podcast, and his name is Ricky Pearsall. So we can't have Luther Burden trying to take the mantle of the motion man, but maybe he can be 2024's version of Do You Know the Motion Man, the Motion Man, the Motion Man. Anywho, the other observation I think is interesting. In 2023, he spent 76% of his time in the slot. In 2024, that ticked up to 81% of the time in the slot. Not a death sentence in any way, and you can do with the information what you will. Similar to what you said, though, Zach, him being in the slot and in motion oftentimes were opportunities where the offense was, to a degree, manufacturing him touches. And again, if you're a good player, you do want to get good players the ball. And obviously he's a good player, and what he does after the catch is what makes him most special. He's looking to maximize yards in the open field, and his ability, if he's able to get a clean release in many instances, which in this Missouri offense, he did it a ton. Those are the opportunities that you see in him maximize not only the short passes, but also the things in the intermediate and flashing, and maybe not as consistent as I would have hoped, but when he did get the opportunities downfield to make plays, he plays tough. And I think that he plays bigger than his 5'11", 208 frame in spurts. With that said, Zach, not like we're walking on eggshells per se, but we are kind of dancing around what may be a pretty incomplete wide receiver prospect.
Yeah, Burden listed at 5'11", 208, like you said. I think so much of the time it feels like he plays smaller than that, partially because of how often he's used in motion. Because speed is such a huge part of Burden's game, it stands to reason that some of his struggles stem from it also. He doesn't utilize cushion well when he's facing off coverage. Instead, he tries to push until he creates contact with the defender, and once he does that, he's lost. Similarly, Burden tends to drift against zone coverages because he doesn't want to throttle down his speed and quickness. Those are his weapons. But against the zone, it's more important to find the space to be in than it is to get quick across space. The one situation when Burden does slow down is when he's challenged physically, and this negates his best chance to separate. Luther Burden's sophomore season at Missouri was fantastic. He drove targets, he racked up yards, scored touchdowns. But even in his breakout 2023 season, a lot of his touches were manufactured through motion or schemed close to the line of scrimmage. And I'm really leery about how creative his future NFL team will be and whether Burden gets put in a box with the rest of the gadgets. There are a lot more of those.
Fidget spinners were such a cool thing at one point, Zach. They were awesome. In order to make sure that we're not here all night, I need to be brief. His lack of physicality often dooms him, specifically early in route and in route. And I think that far too often he can be pushed wide when looking to release from press coverage. And his play strength looks to be an opportunity, just overall, generally speaking. One of the major questions, and I think that this is something that people are going to have to decide. So for anybody listening, one, thank you. But two, one of the things that you're going to have to decide with the information that we have, Luther Burden was not asked hardly ever at the collegiate level to go out wide and win on a route. That's simply not what Missouri asked him to do. Now, with that doesn't mean that you can't be productive at the next level, but it does mean to me that there are limitations that put a cap on what your fantasy prospects can look like, unless you get like plus in Jaden Reed outcomes, like Jaden Reed plus, right? And like really driving the targets in that sense, and the things that the Rams do creatively with Puka and motion and reverses and the short passes. But obviously Puka's doing work everywhere and giving everybody the business. So before I start lingering, he didn't have to go out and win hardly ever. Things were table made for him. They put the bib on for him. Here, we're going to give you this quick little screen here. Hey, we're going to put you in motion and give it to you here. Hey, we're going to put you in a stack and allow you some space. Like Missouri did it, and they were successful in doing so. What people are going to have to decide is if you're excited about what Luther Burden can do after the catch, and that carries far more weight for you, especially if he gets into creative offensive space, maybe that's a reason for you to be able to buy in. But you do have to understand that, again, I don't say this to be derogatory. We watch a lot of film, and there's just not often times where they're like, hey, go out there and just go beat this guy, and we're going to get you the ball. And it is what it is. Not that everybody does that. And that's part of what Zach was talking about at the beginning of the episode, where many of these guys are playing different positions. It says wide receiver. How they win and what they do is different. Do with that what you will. On to the next one. We're going to Ohio State. We're going to the Ohio State. National champions, pains me to say it, Emeka Egbuka. Again, 6'1", 205, and we are looking at 22-year-old national champion who this past season was number 5 in the Big Ten with 81 receptions. And as you go throughout his history, he's played with some star-studded guys over these last 4 years. The Marvin Harrisons of the world, the Garrett Wilsons, the Chris Olaves. I think the list goes on. And obviously the Jeremiah Smith we just saw, who could very well be maybe better than all of them, and even thinking through Jackson Smith and Jigba. So, but this past season, in the national championship season, 81 catches, 1,011 yards, and 10 touchdowns, which looks pretty similar, not quite the yardage, but his 2022 season as a sophomore, where we saw 74 catches, 1,151 yards, and 10 touchdowns then. Emeka Egbuka, again, playing in the slot predominantly in the Ohio State offense, with a lot of really good players around him, finally getting his opportunity to shine. And he did a good job this season in doing so. Zach, is Emeka Egbuka the main character, or does he give you NPC energy? What are we doing here?
Emeka Egbuka is a flyover state. He's a forgotten man. He's the necessary filler between Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., and the inevitable Jeremiah Smith. He has been a constant second to whatever Buckeye star wide receiver was wowing us at the time. It's time we paid him a visit. As a number 2, Egbuka spent a large part of his time in the slot, and his skill set makes the most of it. He breaks very quickly off the line of scrimmage, driving defenders in off coverage to make a decision. And I really like that. He forces the action, puts the defense on the defensive. Egbuka attacks the second level of zones, finding the gaps along the sidelines behind corners, but still in front of the safety. When the ball gets to him, Egbuka is almost invariably a hands catcher, plucking the ball out away from his body. And that makes a difference. We talk about this often. Hands catching, if you catch the ball out away from your body and catch it cleanly, you're catching it soft, you do 2 things. You don't allow the ball to travel into your body where it can bounce off you, create double catches or drops. And also you're using your body to shield the ball from the defender, again, allowing Egbuka to make a catch. And his transition from the catch to a running back is smooth and quick, allowing him to assess the defense and add yards post-catch. And I think he does that really well too. So a lot of things that are really nice about Emeka Egbuka. And don't forget, 4 teams a year in the NFL have 2 top 24 wide receivers. So being a 2, not necessarily the worst thing.
I have to say nice things about a Buckeye. Emeka Egbuka's a dog. Just plain and simple and clear. Emeka Egbuka is a dog. His toughness, and especially even when we think through the things that may not play out for fantasy, but his ability to get in, dick out defenders in the blocking game, whether he's blocking for his teammates in the pass game or the run game. I was a fan of just watching him give a crap about being a good teammate. That said, very solid hands, and I really enjoyed the work that he was able to do in that sense. But it gets my mind thinking, and again, I want to be brief. It gets my mind thinking, how many offenses could Emeka Egbuka come in and be the 2 or 3 immediately, and that offense is an immediate upgrade? And I do think that that's a lot because of what he's able to do at all levels of the field while not being flashy, while not offering all of this massive giant play potential. His reliability with his hands, with his routes, with his ability to not consistently lose at the line of scrimmage and have answers. He does a lot of things really good, Zach.
Yeah.
A lot of things really good. That said, we're talking about him 4th currently on the evening. What else do you have to say about Egbuka and opportunities for him?
So part of the reason Egbuka moved inside over 70% of the time during his tenure at Ohio State is that he struggles with contact, whether it's a jam at the line of scrimmage or physicality during his route. Egbuka has difficulty re-separating once the initial contact happens. And it's not that he's worried about the physicality. It's not that it bothers him. Like he's not shying away from contact, but he has trouble re-separating once that happens. Against man coverage, I think Egbuka has a habit of rounding his routes, which takes away some of that quickness, allowing defenders to close, even if he's created separation initially by that quick move at the stem. So like he'll make that quick move, but then his angle isn't quite where it needs to be. The defense can close. And when working underneath zones, he does have a bad habit of sitting with defenders, negating a potential safety valve for his quarterback. It's probably a foregone conclusion that Emeka Egbuka will be primarily used out of the slot at the next level. But I think he's talented enough to drive targets, which should be valuable in PPR. I think it's unlikely that he ascends to the level of some of the elite wide receivers that work inside. And not that Jackson Smith and Jigba is elite yet, but I don't think he has quite that same profile. I'd love to see him just slide over into the future vacated Cooper Kupp role, though. Man, that would be perfect.
Man, that would be a beauty for sure in LA. Egbuka being one, and I think what's fascinating about him is even though he was able to contribute in many instances in various iterations of the Ohio State offense, I do think that with the limitations specifically that you outlined, Zach, kind of gives us a clearer picture as to why he's kind of still this elder statesman that had the opportunity to come out last year and decided not to, and came back and did well for himself, but more tape to be able to pick apart some of those limitations for him. We'll keep it pushing here. Last two players on the evening. This time we head to Oxford, Mississippi to talk through wide receiver Tre Harris. Got him listed at 6'3", 210, and Tre Harris spent 3 seasons at Louisiana Tech before transferring to Ole Miss in 2023. And at Ole Miss in that first season, 54 catches for 985 yards and 8 scores. He parlayed that into his 2024 season, where he had 60 catches, 1,030 yards, and 7 touchdowns. This past season, he was number 2 in receiving yards in the SEC and number 5 in receptions with 60. Tre Harris, big play maven, obviously in the Lane Kiffin offense that seemingly tends to be a kingmaker when it comes to skill players in his system. Tre Harris is an intriguing prospect. Zach, what do you have on him?
Well, it wasn't that long ago that Ole Miss was the shining bastion of wide receiver production, keeping pace with Ohio State and LSU for the crown of wide receiver U. It's since fallen by the wayside, but Tre Harris is looking to bring it back in a big way. The 6'2" wideout has been the Rebels' leading receiver for the past 2 years and was the primary target at Louisiana Tech before that. Harris does nearly everything well. He's very efficient versus off coverage, carving out yards underneath and adding extra with his legs post-catch. Whether it's making plays across the middle in traffic or getting downfield at the catch point, Harris excels at catching the ball through contact. So he does a little bit of both, where we talk about like fight, which, catching the ball in traffic in the middle, but also has the ability to go up high point in route. He sets up defenders well to gain leverage and create separation. He often uses combinations of moves to earn space. So you see him put a defender on skates where he'll go an out and up, or he'll go a slant and go, or he'll, hit the brakes on the hitch and then hit you with the go. He reads cushion against both man coverage and zones very well, especially exploiting defenders who commit to stopping him deep by slamming on those brakes and coming back to make a play.
One of the players that consistently comes back to the quarterback, working back. And again, I think that's one of those things that will help to limit interceptions and mistakes from your quarterback, which I think is something that will help him garner targets going forward as well. I really like his fluidity, even being a guy who's 6'3", 210. I don't know that I would expect him, for me, to be as smooth a mover as he is, but I do like the way that he's able to navigate all areas of the field effortlessly. I don't ever feel like he's in a position to where, man, he is really being put in a blender right now because of a defense or because of defenders beating the brakes off of him all over the place. I like his pluckability. terms of him going after the football in many instances. And I think that there are plenty of circus sketches that you'll be able to see throughout his film of things that he is doing to make Jackson Dart look like a first-round possible quarterback in some eyes. Do with that what you will. Tre Harris, intriguing prospect. And I think that there are things that maybe you're not driving an offense through him in the passing game, but I do think that he's a really talented player that a lot of offenses will be happy to have. What opportunities or drawbacks did you see in Harris's game, Zach?
So I think that there was dramatic improvement in Harris's technique at beating press coverage from his time at Tech to the 2023 and 24 seasons. But I still think he can be bothered by physicality and be rerouted. And you don't expect that. I mean, he's a big wide receiver, so you're not necessarily expecting him to be bothered by that physicality. Against zone coverages, I think Harris falls into a bad habit sometimes of running his slants a few steps too far before he makes that cut, narrowing that throwing window for his quarterback. And I think he also has a tendency to sometimes stand next to a defender rather than continuing to move on to an open spot. The 2025 receiver class is noticeably down, but that does not mean that there won't be productive players coming out. And I think Tre Harris looks to be one. I think he plays with really good pace and can win at all levels of the field. And maybe most importantly of all for fantasy, Harris gets open consistently. This should drive targets and continue at the next level.
When we talk about getting open, Zach, we talk so often about the different types of quarterbacks, and I think we go to the same examples each year, but it tends to bear out, see it through it quarterbacks versus the anticipatory quarterbacks. And if he's going to be someone who is consistently getting open the way that he does, that is going to afford him opportunities in whatever type of quarterback that he's playing with. Tre Harris is a fascinating player in this group. Curious to see what the NFL says about him and really how he tests in the combine. I think he's going to be one of the more intriguing guys to be on the lookout for. Lastly, on the evening, we go to the one, the only Matthew Golden. 6 feet, 195 pounds, 21-year-old, doesn't turn 22 until August. In 2024, Matthew Golden led the SEC in receiving touchdowns, and he was number 3 in receiving yards. 58 catches, 987 yards, 9 touchdowns. And as we mentioned before, his another player that also transferred because his first 2 seasons were at the University of Houston. Now, no crazy numbers to look at in terms of his time at Houston that would have had you thinking, oh, this guy's going to be one of the top receivers for a team that was playoff bound and did lots of very positive things in the postseason for the last 2 years. But here we are. Matthew Golden. Zach Reed, what are your thoughts on the fast rising, highly acclaimed Matthew Golden?
When GoldenEye 007 was released, it was the 3rd best-selling Nintendo 64 game. Baron Samedi and Timed Minds, if you were wondering. The Golden Girls sitcom ran for 7 seasons, finishing top 10 in the Nielsen ratings in 6 of those 7. Golden Retrievers are perennially in the top 5 most popular dog breeds in the U.S., according to the American Kennel Club, with Buddy, the Golden Receiver, holding down the breed's all-time touchdown record with 7. Matthew Golden has a lot to live up to. The piece of Golden's game that pops the most to me is his ability to track and adjust to deep throws. He will attack a defender with max effort and then refine the ball and make a catch downfield. Golden does a good job catching the ball away from his body and is dependable enough to make the plays that he should make. Working underneath zones, he's able to attack the defenses with crossing routes. And once Golden has the ball, his ability to transition quickly to a runner allows him to eat up the space that's in front of him but I don't think he's getting much more than what's there.
Do you think, Zach, let me ask this. No, let me ask it a different way. I'm sorry. What do you attribute the late push in hype for Golden based off of what you just talked about, what you saw? What is it that has him flying up boards?
I don't know. And you and I have kind of talked off show about this a little bit. I'm really surprised that he was kind of a surprise declare. Somebody has told him at some point that he is going earlier than I would take him in this class. But this is a class that I feel so out of touch with NFL insiders and NFL GMs who are feeding the insiders information, because the way this class appears to be shaping up is not anywhere near the way I see it. And so it'll be interesting to see how Golden is drafted. It will be interesting to see how people react to if he gets first round capital, because again, somebody somewhere told him to come out in this class.
I appreciate you sharing that, Zach, because I had Golden graded higher than I thought I would on the watch and on my notes, because I think that there are some really positive things when we think through, again, another guy that spends a ton of time playing slot. I didn't look up his percentages pre-show, but similar to obviously what we talked about with Burden and with Egbuka, I do think a lot of what you said about how Harris was able to tempo and kind of control pace in the midst of his actual route, I think Golden has a lot of that to his game. And once again, when we think about Steve Sarkisian and the offense at Texas, for those that may not be heavy into the college football game, Steve Sarkisian is going to dial up opportunities for his quarterbacks to hit bombs consistently to wide receivers, just the way that Lane Kiffin would down at Ole Miss. I do think that he has really strong ball skills when it comes to at the catch point. Not that he's beasting players per se, in a different manner than Teteroa, but I do think that his ability to contort, to be able to move his body in a manner that allows him to be able to get to places and spaces that I don't tend to see receivers do, I think he does those things well. I do like the fact that he is strong after the catch. I don't know that he's necessarily dynamic, but it's not a case where first defender is consistently able to trip him down or trip him up consistently. I think that Matthew Golden is someone that, while not necessarily spectacular in my mind, I do see him as a talented player, and I just don't know why my grades, in terms of what I was checking in the actual notes, why don't I feel better about this? I guess is my question, and I don't know the answer. Can you help me with that?
Well, it's funny because there were some spectacular plays, and like what you're talking about, he does track and he does adjust and he does late separate and re-separate. But I think there's also a lack of creativity in the way that Golden plays, whether it's simply not being able to leverage a defender to gain yards after catch, or having poor spatial awareness where he doesn't extricate himself from trouble well all the time. Golden doesn't maintain separation within his routes. Against man coverage, I think he tends to push too far and eat up space that the corner is giving him. And against zone coverages, again, I think he continues to drift toward defenders rather than sitting down in an opening. And he relies on his ability to re-separate at the end. And he also relies on a quarterback to put the ball somewhere that the defense isn't expecting so he can go get it. There were a lot of those like back shoulder where he's got to make the adjustment. Since Golden declared for the NFL draft a month ago, his place within the hierarchy of the 2025 class has skyrocketed. There are some tantalizing traits to his game, but it seems like there could be disappointment lurking just under that surface. The golden idol waiting to spring the trap that bring the walls down around us.
It feels like Legends of the Hidden Temple, something of that nature, where the old Nickelodeon game. Yeah. What was it? The Blue Barracudas.
Yep.
Anywho, enough of me showing my age. I am fascinated by Matthew Golden, and I also think that his ascension and kind of the cognitive dissonance that I'm wrestling with around him is a microcosm of my feelings on this wide receiver class. And that is a fascinating way to transition now into our film grades, Zach. We've been, I think, fair with our assessments of these players and what we've seen of their film. And now we get to talk about how they rank against each other. Zach, what are the film grades telling you about how these 6 wide receivers stack up?
It's telling me that I'm way out of touch with what's going on in the community at large, because I have Travis Hunter as my wide receiver 1 in this group. I think he's the best wide receiver in the class. I'm not sure he will even play wide receiver. So go stop and think about that for a second. The best wide receiver in the 2025 class, by my estimation, may be a cornerback. So that tells you where we're starting off. My second in this group is Tre Harris. And that's probably higher than most people will have Harris. And I'm willing to accept that. It's going to be the type of player that I probably end up with at the back end of a first round. And I'm very happy that I did, because there will be other players that people like more. Third, I have Emeka Egbuka. Again, give me the high volume. I think he does that depending on where he lands. That slot production I want. Then Tet McMillan. And again, I'm lower on Tet McMillan than a lot of other people, but not because Tet McMillan is a bad player. I think he is a good player in a bad situation where how he wins is a really tough path to success. Then Golden and Luther Burden bringing up the rear at 6. Maybe I've just been hurt by Rondale Moore too much, but man, I really wanted to love Luther Burden. I was so excited to watch his film at the beginning of this process. And the 2025 class is led by a cornerback.
Go figure. 2025 is just hitting so very different than what our bingo board said. Like you, Zach, and I was not expecting this. And I wasn't expecting us to be in agreement on this. I probably showed my hand earlier with how I was talking about Travis Hunter, but this is one of those things that I get really annoyed with people saying. I think Travis Hunter is the best wide receiver in this class, and it's not close. Which again says something about this class, because I don't think that he's a complete wide receiver prospect, but I do think that he is a uber talented one. Oh man, we'll see how that checks out. I have Travis Hunter at 1, wide receiver 2 in the class for me in terms of our film grades is Emeka Egbuka. From there, I have it, and it's kind of close with Emeka, so that maybe they're in a tier. I would say is Tetaroa McMillan. I think that again. I have the ghost of Drake London prospect in my ear saying several things and has me nervous, but strictly on film grade, I have him 3. I have Matthew Golden rated at 4. Tre Harris is a slight tick behind him at 5. And Luther Burden is wide receiver 6 among this group for me. I think we've talked plenty about our thoughts on them, Zach, but we've got a fresh crop of wide receivers that we'll be talking about next week. Is there anything before we put these 6 to bed? Anything else that we need to make sure that we address?
I will just say that I listened to JJ Zacharyson today talk about how Luther Burden has a tremendous analytic comparatively to this class, has one of the 4 best analytical profiles in the group. So we may be diametrically opposed to the numbers this year. So a fun evaluation, if not a fun class.
And look, we've been dissenters before. We have.
Yes.
As we continue to go through this process year in and year out, one of the things I find, Zach, is our lists, when we go back and look at other folks, our lists in terms of film grades don't necessarily look like everyone else's. And for a long time, I was insecure about that. And then I recognized that, as we've mentioned before, with us putting in the work, us continuing to ideally learn from some mistakes, but also to be able to see things more clearly and more accurately, hopefully that we continue to get better at our craft. And so while we may not be up on Luther Burden like many others are, I'm okay with that.
That's JMic really tactfully saying we'll stick with our evals because we've been successful enough.
Enough. Wait, but that's the first 6 wide receivers, Zach. Who are the even next 6 that we'll even get to? Not that you have to name them now, but I'm just throwing that out there as a rhetorical question in its own.
I will tell you, I'm disappointed we didn't get to do Bond and Golden in the same show. Mm-hmm. That would have been fun since they played in the same receiving core. But it'll be interesting. I want to talk Ricky White. I'm not sure he belongs in the top 12 for most people. He does for me.
Maybe we'll get a set of teammates. Maybe we'll get a set of teammates next episode, and perhaps it's not who you all think that it is, and maybe we'll get a guy that people wonder if he's the next Quentin Johnston, or is he more than that? Maybe those will be a couple of players that we'll talk about. Maybe we'll talk about Royals. Maybe I don't know. We'll see. But I'm excited to be able to get into it with you next week, Zach. Another 7 days away from being able to dive in and put the period, exclamation point, question mark on this wide receiver group before we get into tight ends, quarterbacks, and then obviously catch all for 1,000,000,001 running backs. And look, we see you in the chat. We see you all with the direct messages, a lot of the conversations that you've had. Major shout out to our boy Greg Eckert, who continues to make sure that we have LeQuint Allen on our list of players to check out for a catch-all. But the next several weeks, Zach, are going to be fun. Obviously, we'll have the combine that comes around that we'll be able to touch base with next week as well. I'm excited to continue rolling through the Hootenanny with you, my brother.
Absolutely. This has been so much fun. Appreciate everybody for hanging with us, hanging in the chat. It's popping over here at the Fantasy Cares YouTube stream every Tuesday at 9:30. We appreciate everybody who listens in podcast form. It really is what makes this fun for us, is being able to share with you, being able to interact with you, being able to do this, but also be able to involve everybody, be part of the community. And so thank you again. We're going to run it back next week. We'll do 6 more wide receivers. But this has been the Dynasty Dummies. That's JMic at JMicCheck. I am at Tacit Assassin 13. Thank you for listening. Peace. I wasn't ready.